Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the most important recording projects ever, bar none. And this is one that some of you have mentioned, which I have to talk about. It is the complete Haydn string quartets with the Tátrai Quartet on Hungaroton. Here it is. It came in a box. Well, these things were in a box, which I threw away. But this is it. The first complete Haydn quartet cycle by a single quartet. You could assemble one previously from other people, but this was the one that did it. I mean, the most important series of chamber works ever composed. I mean, they really are. There's no question about that. Even people who don't particularly care for Haydn and particularly don't care for chamber music admit that the Haydn string quartets are the ne plus ultra body of quartet literature, and that he was the guy. I mean, it's historically, there's no question. He was the guy who established the string quartet as the vehicle for the highest and most sublime thoughts in the history of Western music. Oh, yeah. But they really are extraordinary. There's, 64 and a half of them? Or something like, or 68 and a half of them, I think. That's a lot of them. And they really are extraordinary works, right from the very beginning, even the earlier works. And I just want to go through it bit by bit. Let me turn it upside down here. So we can start at the beginning. And this, let me just say something about these players. I mean, they're a Hungarian group. They play with a wonderfully rough and edgy sonority. It really anticipates period instrument movement with minimal vibrato and all of that stuff. But despite that, the minimal vibrato, all that stuff, they still have warmth where necessary, and they still have that power and rhythm and urgency and all of that stuff, all the best of modern string playing. A lot of the things that the period instrument ensembles, or those that mimic them, are trying to get rid of to their detriment. Because Haydn was, and I can't say this enough, even more than Beethoven in some ways, he was the most forward-thinking composer out there. And his music is so somehow supernaturally well-suited to modern playing and modern playing technique and modern ensembles. It just works supremely well. His orchestral music works best when you have a big orchestra and you play the daylights out of it. You play it like Beethoven, And the same thing is true of his chamber music. It needs to be played with passion and energy and verve, and it really doesn't matter whether you're period instrumenty or not. I mean, I used to love those Haydn quartet recordings on Hyperion with the Solomon Quartet. Remember those? I mean, they deleted them because they were doing a whole nother cycle with the new London Haydn, whatever they're called, and they're just horrible beyond all imagining. Horribly awful. So, it doesn't really depend on the type of instrument as it does the quality of the playing and of the players thereupon. Right? I mean, that's what really matters. So let's go through this because it was an extraordinary achievement, and it was done in Hungary, and it was hard to find in the U.S. for a while. Happily, when CDs came out and Otto Quittner and his family got going with Qualiton imports from Hungary, we were able to get our hands on this stuff. That was a wonderful time. If you were interested in what had been going on behind the Iron Curtain, because there was the Bartók series and there's this stuff, and they made some wonderful records. They really did. And the Haydn tradition in Hungary is a wonderful living tradition of musicianship, because Haydn was, of course, originally from that part of the world, from Lower Austria, Hungary, the part where you couldn't tell which country you were in. Technically, I think now it's Austria, but it may have been Hungary then. Who knows? So it's just Rorau was the village where he was born. And here we have it. String quartets 1, 2, 42, and 103. That's Opus 1, Opus 2, Opus 42, and Opus 103. Now, the early pieces are what they call quartet divertimenti. They're in 5 movements with a central slow movement and a minuet on either side for the most part. Some of them were found to have wind and wind parts, and they actually turned out to be symphonies, because in those days, it wasn't always easy to tell, and unless you actually had the actual parts, you couldn't always determine whether or not it was a symphony or a quartet or some chamber work, because the orchestras were tiny in private aristocratic homes. So here they are, and they're absolutely lovely. Let's see, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, let's see, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think there are 9 of them, 9 or 10 of them, or something like that, right? 9 or 10? No, 10 of them. There are 10, and they're delicious. I mean, they're not as profound or as developmental as the later quartets, but Haydn was always developmental. I mean, Haydn was Haydn right from his early days. Now, Opus 42 is a teeny tiny little quartet. It was nicknamed the Razor, supposedly because someone once said, I give you my latest quartet if you give me a new sharp razor or something like that. It's a midi quartet. It's in 4 tiny movements. It's wonderful to listen to, actually. I should do something with this quartet. Really, I should find a way to do a feature about it and play with it a little bit, because it's sort of Haydn's quartet in miniature. It's delightful. It has the opening movement. It begins with an andante. Andante et innocentamente, innocently. Not like a tough sonata allegro, and then a minuet, and then an adagio and a final presto. And that's it. The whole thing is 4-2-2-2. So 4-2-2-2 is 10, 11, it's about 12 minutes long. And then the D minor, Opus 103, is just 2 middle movements, the last thing that Haydn wrote. And he couldn't finish because he had arteriosclerosis. He was too sick to continue to get his thoughts together and force himself to go through the sweat and turmoil of the creative process. And it's a shame. I mean, Haydn himself said, he says he is full of ideas, but he couldn't write them down. That was it, the end of his quartet career. The most interesting thing about Haydn as a quartet composer, by the way, is this. Haydn was the most humble person that ever lived, but he knew what he was good at. When he heard Mozart's operas, he refused to be commissioned to write operas. He said to everyone, commission Mozart. He's better at it than I am. He heard Mozart's concertos. He didn't write concertos. But he heard Mozart's quartets and Beethoven's Opus 18 quartets, and he kept writing quartets. And that tells us something. It tells us something about his proprietary feeling for the medium and his knowledge that he was just the greatest. And he was. There you go. So then we've got Opus 9 and Opus 17. Now, these are very rarely played. These are wonderful pieces, but they are earlier works, obviously, from the Sturm und Drang period, actually. We're getting into it with these pieces. And so there's some very, very passionate and exciting music. They are not as balanced between the parts, and they don't fit the ideal of the mature classical period string quartet yet. Not quite. They're almost there. But that doesn't mean they're not wonderful music for what they are, which is probably the most developed early Haydn that there is, the most forward-looking and interesting. And I will say this, they're similar to like Beethoven's string trios, which, nobody criticizes. Everyone says, oh, they're masterpieces, they're early Beethoven. So why don't we give the same credit for these, which fall in the same place, relatively speaking, in the composer's development? And remember, this was the language Haydn was inventing. So Opus 9 and Opus 17 are worth hearing once you know the others, because you'll hear all of those wonderful Haydn-esque touches. The humor is there. The sudden changes in key and mood are there. The passionate expression is there. Those quasi-spiritual slow movements, it's all there. It's all there. It will become more concentrated later on, but it's there. Okay, then we get Opus 20. Opus 20 is, I've done a separate video on Opus 20. Screaming masterpieces. The first great flowering of the mature classical style. 3 of them end with fugues, because one of the jobs of classical composers, Haydn and Mozart, was to integrate the mastery of Baroque counterpoint with the homophonic style, the opera buffa, the comedic style of the classical period. And Haydn does it here. These are great, great pieces. This is vintage Sturm und Drang stuffs. 2 of them are in minor keys, the F minor and the G minor. The G minor is really disturbing, I have to say. It's incredible stuff. Then we get Opus 33. These are the Russian quartets, is what they're called, but this has the joke. This is where comedy makes its big appearance. The 6 minuets are replaced by movements called scherzo, which means joke. It's what Beethoven was supposed to have invented, but of course Haydn did, because he invented everything first, and they are delicious. The joke is, I think, the E-flat major one, isn't it? I think it is, and it's hilariously funny. The finale is a scream. Try and figure out when it ends. incredible. And then we have Opus 50, the Prussian quartets, because they begin with cello solos, because the King of Prussia was a cellist. Mozart also wrote some Prussian quartets that aren't nearly as good as Haydn's Prussian quartets. These are glorious works with all kinds of fabulous invention and evocative sonorities and some crazy stuff going on, and you're going to love them. So there you go. Some Hungarian music in there too, which is oodles of fun. Then we have, let's see, Opus 54, 55. That's because they were published in groups of 3, but Haydn wrote, it's a single set of 6. All of these were written in single sets of 6, even though the opus numbers broke them up. These are less popular than the other Haydn mature quartets. They are works of consolidation, you might say. Works that integrate all of the elements that we've heard up to this point, and in a very serious way. They're a little bit, how could I say, they're almost dark. I mean, in a sense, they're not Haydn. They're very carefully worked out Haydn. Haydn for connoisseurs, let's say. And I'm a connoisseur, and so are you. So you don't have any problem with them, right? Then we've got Opus 64. Oh, everybody loves Opus 64. This one has the Lark, this set of 6, the Lark Quartet, which is extraordinary, an amazing piece of music. And they're all masterpieces, every single last one of them. This is the maturity of the Viennese classical style, the high point, the epitome, the whatever. At this point, we're just going from one screaming masterpiece to another. I mean, we have been since Opus 20, really, but it's amazing. Then we've got Opus 71 and 74, which again is a single set. Now, these were written when Haydn was in England, or for performance in England. These are real concert quartets. So is Opus 76. These are works that were designed to be performed in a hall in front of a large audience. They're big and bold and quasi-symphonic in their impact. Opus 76 has the Emperor Quartet. These use, some English or Irish or Hungarian folk melody things in them. They're Haydn in his fabulous popular style, that popular style that never panders, that's as sophisticated as anything anybody was doing, but that is so listenable. It goes down so easy. They're glorious. And like I said, they were written to be played in concert circumstances where they might do a symphony. So all on the same stage. And they're bigger in scale and in scope. Then we've got the quartet version of the 7 Last Words, which is absolutely horrible. It should never be played. But quartets love it because, well, it's spiritual and because Haydn made the arrangement or tolerated the arrangement. And essentially, this is the entire work with all the wind parts taken out, and you just play the string bits. And the music is indestructible. It's not that it's bad. It's just that if you've heard the orchestral original, to hear, what is it? It's 7 slow movements: largo, grave, grave, largo, adagio, lento, largo, with an introduction, which is largo, and then a earthquake at the end, which sounds like, a tempest in a teapot on the quartet. Come on, really. But they do it. They do it very well. And finally, Opus 77, the last 2 quartets that Haydn wrote, of which that incomplete Opus 103 was going to be part of this set, the Lobkowitz quartets. Haydn never stopped evolving. And like all of those works so far, they're screaming masterpieces. They're amazing. And the interesting thing about it is we see him getting into the territory that nobody would approach until late Beethoven. Yes, these are still sort of standard 4-movement quartets, but the minuets, which he calls minuets again, are real scherzos, a la Beethoven. And he's moving away from sonata form first movements. He's operating in the sonata style, but in a wider sense. He's getting away from, the actual what we would call the textbook type sonata form, which Haydn never really did anyway. He invented it, but he was always moving beyond it. But here he's really getting into the extremes of what the sonata style can do, harmonically particularly. It's astonishing. And Beethoven learned a lot from these works. It's really interesting. When Beethoven was Haydn's student, he was pretty nasty to Haydn. He really was, because he was, paranoid and trying to make his reputation and being compared to his betters, and he hated them and he was jealous and crazy. But as he got older, he became ever more respectful and reverential towards Haydn, and particularly towards those who spoke, contemptuously of Haydn's achievement, because Beethoven understood it, and his music became more and more Haydn-esque the more forward-looking and revolutionary it got. It's a fascinating study, it really is. So here you have it. I mean, one of the most important and really well done series of records ever made. The complete Haydn quartets with the Tátrai Quartet on Hungaroton. Essential listening. And there have been, of course, quite a few complete Haydn quartet cycles since then, some of them very, very good. My favorite being the Alrin on Tatchet, the Alrin Quartet, which is a fabulous cycle. And then, of course, period instrument people are like doing them all over the place, and most of them sound like hell. But this was the thing that started it all. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.